Hey everybody, welcome back to the lab. It's Mary Allred, your host. Great to be here. Hope everyone's having an awesome week. Today in the lab, I am joined by Dave Dworschak, the head of growth at Phoebe. Dave, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Hey, Miriam. Thanks for having me.
Let's get right into it. You and I have been catching up before we jump on, but I say this a lot, but a new face, kind of new name in the industry, yourself and Phoebe. So let's start with an introduction. Do you want to talk about your background and tell kind of your personal story?
Yeah, sure. So I have been, I'm Dave. Nice to meet everybody. I've been in and around kind of healthcare in some capacity, more or less my whole career. Right out of college, which I, don't have a technical or healthcare background, transparently, but right out of college, I helped start a company that was in the early days of electronic medical records for acute care hospitals and providers. So we basically help people migrate off of paper into EHRs for the first time. Actually thought that would be like a fun little project out of college, maybe 6 months, a year, something like that. And ended up sticking around and helping grow that business from the first employee in 2010 or 11. About 7 years later, we were roughly 200 people, moving hospitals and moving data for hospitals in various capacities all across the country. Really interesting experience there. It was more of a services business, but I did have the chance to build basically a BPO offshore in the Philippines through that. So traveled back and forth and got to do kind of the onshore offshore healthcare operating model, which was very fun. And then I left that in 2018, and I started my first software company. Transparently did not know a lot about technology at the time going into that, but had a couple of ideas with a good friend of mine who was a traveling nurse, and just dove right in to figure out how to do a startup. And we ended up, over the course of around 5 years, building a platform for traveling healthcare workers that are kind of moving around from hospital to hospital, helped build a centralized digital wallet or clearinghouse, so to say, of their credentials and paperwork. So they're not having to get re-credentialed every time they move from job to job every few months. And then on the employment side, we had a product for staffing companies to both manage compliance as well as like self-serve or provide the healthcare workers a self-serve mechanism for getting through like the job search, recruitment, compliance, et cetera. So over the course of that like 5-year run, we had several 100,000 users, several hundred companies on the like staffing company side of the fence using the product, and eventually sold into a private equity backed, very large traveling nurse staffing firm. And at the end of the day, merged my team of about 60 people into their team of 500 or so, and had quite an interesting experience working both on the early stage startup as well as what it looks like to merge in with a very large enterprise org doing one of the highest like kind of gross staffing operations on the healthcare side in the country.
Very cool. Very interesting. A wide array, but mostly healthcare based, which is neat. And there's a lot of crossover. Obviously, healthcare is vast and there's a lot of different facets, but relevant to home care and leading to where you are. You're based in Orlando. Are you a Floridian, or where are you from originally?
Yeah, I'm in North Florida, actually, in Jacksonville, so close. But I grew up in Florida. I was here most of my life. Not super interesting for everybody, but I moved out of Florida 10, 11 years ago. For the last 10 or 11 years, I lived in several places: Louisiana, Colorado, several stints overseas, and then have a couple of young kids. And as tends to happen, moved back closer to family a couple of years ago from Colorado into Jacksonville. So I'm here in Florida, and then I know we'll talk a little bit about Phoebe today as well, the company that I'm working on. But I'm here in Florida, but most of our team and company is based out of New York.
So Phoebe, kind of a newer name in the industry, but popping up more and more everywhere. And I've just gotten acquainted with you over the last several months and have been really impressed with you and the team. And so talk a little bit about Phoebe, overview, who you guys are, what you're up to, what you're building, what problems you're solving, just kind of like high level overview. And then we're going to talk, more in depth today about AI and about like the problems that you guys are already quite literally solving. But start with an overview.
Yeah, sure. So, at a high level, like Phoebe, we build AI teammates for home care and home health businesses. We've been working on this since really late 2024. Justin, our founder and CEO, was, also a kind of a second time founder, has built and sold software companies in the past. And him and I met, and he was working on a thesis in this space. And we spent a good amount of time, we'll say ideating and talking to people and talking to healthcare workers and caregivers and folks all across the market, not just on the home care home health side, but also in SNFs and other assisted living type facilities and post acute space. And we really zeroed in on the idea for Phoebe when we met the home care scheduler, who and really even before that, we had tons of workers we were chatting with on some of our early products, caregivers, healthcare workers, and they were always saying like, well, my job of keeping myself scheduled is pretty difficult, but you should go talk to the people that are scheduling me, and ultimately ended up landing on what we do today, which is building AI scheduling assistants for home care and home health businesses, and have had that up and running now for a little more than 6 months.
Amazing. And you say, yeah, AI assistants, and we're talking about like the role of the scheduler. The scheduler has like kind of primary functions and maybe secondary functions. We both know like every home care business like a snowflake runs and operates a little bit differently, but go like one layer deeper, some of just kind of like high level tasks of the scheduler that you guys are specifically plugging into today.
Yeah, totally. So as great software companies should do, we talk to people who are doing the scheduling work every day, and that's how we decide, what we're going to build and what we're going to help with first. And the core activities we're focused on today are number one, the scheduling outreach, where you've got new clients, or you have caregivers going on vacation, or you've got call outs, which is actually kind of the first problem we started to tackle. And the scheduler needs to reach out to 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 caregivers in order to try to get a shift filled. Phoebe helps with that by going into the EHR scheduling platform of the home care business and extracting all the information, the scheduler would typically be reading in order to have a conversation with the caregiver via phone, via text about a shift or a case opportunity that's open. And then rather than the scheduler picking up the phone and say calling 15 people back to back over the course of 45 minutes, Phoebe's voice and SMS texting AI assistant can simultaneously reach out to the caregivers and have conversations all at once. So that's kind of the first thing we launched, and also the thing that's most exciting for folks, especially because schedulers spend so much time making calls and sending text messages that don't lead to people taking shifts. So you've got, Phoebe, this AI assistant that's really being directed by you as a scheduler, that is going out and doing all the dirty work for you and then bringing you back to people who are interested and qualified and ready to talk. So that's the kind of core thing. And then we've got a few other activities in and around scheduling and schedule coordination, where we're doing day before shift confirmations automatically and getting explicit confirmation from caregivers about, their shifts, that they're going to be at their shift or shifts for the following day. It's very flexible the way we set that up for clients. Phoebe persistently follows up, follows kind of the tone, approach, culture that the agency would typically take to communicate with their staff. So, learns from that and then executes, in the same fashion that the scheduler or coordinator would. And then on the backside of shifts, we are also monitoring for missed clock ins and clock outs. So, faster than a scheduler would typically even learn that somebody has missed their clock in or clock out, Phoebe has already texted the caregiver, called the caregiver, had a conversation with them, tried to troubleshoot, figure out what's going on, hopefully just get them to clock in or out, but otherwise escalates it up to the scheduling team on those edge cases that the AI can't quite handle.
And it's text and voice based, correct?
It is, yeah, and it's dynamic based on kind of the situation, where if it's urgent, it might jump right to phone, or if it's not so urgent, it might just do text, or if it's kind of urgent but not necessarily is something that needs to be resolved in the next 30 minutes, it'll do a combination of both.
Yeah, and for any either skeptics or AI enthusiasts, you guys have like a model, right, baked in onto your website. And so people can actually go and try it themselves, which is where I started. And then, you all showed me how it works. But it's incredible. Like, we're going to get back into like these specifics that you just shared, but I want to like zoom out a little bit because AI is moving so fast, and I know that's cliche, everyone's reading it in the headlines, like, it's everywhere all the time, and I get that, and it really is, but the speed at which it's improving is amazing and also important because before we jumped on, I was telling you, like, I was at CareSwitch over a year ago now, and the improvements that you all have seen in the last 3 to 6 months, like, it's moving so fast, and so what voice was a year ago, 2 years ago is night and day from where voice is at today. And so I guess my just kind of like open-ended question is like, yeah, what improvements and advancements have you seen recently that are getting you guys excited about like where this is really going and how quickly we're going to get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say over the last like 6 to 12 months, we've gone, especially in like the voice, AI, but this is just like LLMs in general. We've gone from like interesting to and useful to like reliable and effective. So what, previously was interesting where you could, have a voice AI like make a call 6 months, a year ago. It worked. It wasn't, quite there, but we've gone from the point of like, this is clearly AI to like, this is a very natural sounding conversation that many caregivers, even though they're aware that the call they're receiving is from an AI or from Phoebe, that they forget and just have casual conversations. So we've gone from like, kind of like outbound, just like a voice that can call and say something, a full AI that can have a natural sounding conversation, follow instructions reliably, handle exceptions, handle edge cases. So I would say overarching theme would be, we've gone from interesting to quite reliable. And maybe the caveat I would say is, uh, there are two ingredients to make sure that it works well. You've got to have someone that understands the business logic, that is going into the conversations, really understands the kind of edge cases in business and kind of culture of the caregiver, or whatever the situation is. And then still pretty important in our opinion to have somebody, very technical expertise to kind of lead this, where you can go out today, and I encourage everybody to, even as a non-technical, person or non-engineer, you can go out and do tons of awesome stuff with AI. But then getting it to the point where you're kind of layering AI on top of your business and your software that is not just, say, providing you information in the background, but is like real-time running aspects of your business. It's that like sweet spot combination of, the right technical team plus the right, business logic combined that makes things work.
Yeah, really, really well said. A few months ago or a year ago, it was like, oh, it's like flashy, cool idea, conceptual, like, oh, futuristic. But now it's like you talk to an AI and you don't know it's an AI. Like, in my opinion, like that's the bar is you don't actually know that you're talking to an AI. And this might be an overshare, but I was ordering at Panda Express like a couple of weeks ago and it was an AI and it was very clearly an AI, but I was like, I'm going to throw some edge cases at it, gluten free, dairy free, how much sugar? Like I was like, let's just get after a little bit. But it's amazing. Like you feed this thing so much information, it can handle the edge cases. And I bring that up because in home care, it is so nuanced. We're dealing with people's life, every single caregiver, everything, every single shift, every single client. Like there's so many nuances, and that's actually where AI thrives when it gets good. Is like it can handle the edge cases, it can handle the complexity. It's just a matter of training it, building it up, and the technology being able to support that.
Yep, 100% agree. And
I
I've
want to talk about
the,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, sorry. I've also encountered some of the voice AI ordering systems lately. It's quite interesting.
It's quite interesting, but it's like it's here, it's like, you encounter it every day, every week, but very quickly that is going to be like standard practice. And so rather than the tension or the friction up against it, it's like, no, we just embrace it and it's going to get better.
Yeah, totally.
I want to hear kind of like industry pulse check what you're hearing from operators. So, obviously, listening to this is a bunch of owner operators, some of which are using AI every day, some of which are like tinkering with it, some of which are maybe holding out to see what's coming. But you just told me your calendar's booked out almost a month right now, like present day. And so you are talking to owners operators every single day. I'm curious what you're hearing from them, like average consumption, tools that they're using, fears and frustrations. Give me just like a sneak peek of like what you're hearing from a lot of operators today.
Yeah, great question. It's interesting. Trent, I do honestly still talk to some people who feels like a surprise to me, but like just don't know that voice AI is even possible. And that's becoming like less and less of our calls, especially because when people land on our website, we give an opportunity for people to just like chat with the AI. So a lot of people have actually done that before they talk to me. But it's all the way from the spectrum of people who don't know that it's possible, and then we have some more sophisticated operators that we talk to that have many of which have actually tried kind of building some of the stuff that we deploy for agencies, and they do it through a combination of different off the shelf platforms platforms and, automation backends like Zapier or Make. And, those folks are coming and saying like, look, we've gotten the AI to be able to make a call, but we can't really do anything with it. And that's again where the nuance and challenge comes in of having to really understand how to integrate it with your systems beyond what's available kind of off the shelf. But, overall, I would say most people we talk to are, classic use of like very normal using ChatGPT, not just to like help them with business, but also to analyze data and, look for caregiver trends and spot new client marketing strategies. So, most people are, using it, which is, it's getting to the point where people are comfortable enough in their own daily use where they're saying like, look, I think I could actually start to put some of this kind of AI out in the front lines. A lot of our customers or even prospects, leads we're talking to, they're really interested in AI, but very skeptical to put it in front of their clients, which, we listened to that very early on where, Phoebe right now is very focused on the agency to caregiver communication loop. We are starting to have many requests from clients to be like, look, this is awesome. I'm comfortable with Phoebe reaching out to my caregivers at this point. So like, let's bring in the client loop. But, on average, I would say the kind of, you know, crawl, walk, run strategy is like, first I'm going to use it internally. I'm getting comfortable. Then I'm like, well, maybe I'll have this start to help with some of my caregiver facing operations. And then okay, I feel good with that. So I'm going to start to bring it into the client side.
What are some of the common like misconceptions? Like you said, it still does surprise some people. What are people maybe wrong about when they come to you?
One thing, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is there is so much AI out there. At this point, there are tons of consulting companies and development shops and just general AI industry agnostic tools that are trying to figure out what markets they're going to sell into. And both folks, especially folks coming in from outside of home care, home health, the healthcare ecosystem overall, they kind of come in with the promise of, you can just plug the AI into the system and it's just going to work and it's going to do work while you sleep and it's going to do things in the background and you don't have to really pay attention to it. And, so people come in, I would say skeptical overall of like, look, I haven't seen, any AI that I would be comfortable like just letting it run. So one thing that is pretty commonly like misunderstood coming into our calls is people don't realize there's a middle ground between like, do I have to just like give the AI my work versus like I have to not use AI at all? And one thing that we're trying to be very heavily intentional about is like there's a very healthy middle where you can come in and like start to layer AI into your operations, but still have full control over what it's doing, how it's working, et cetera. So like biggest thing I would say is like it's not an like question of like, do I do it or do I not do it? It's more of like, how can I like start to weave AI into my day-to-day operations so that I don't kind of fall behind? And if I look kind of back at maybe 3 months, 6 months ago when we were earlier on, a lot of folks were more of the mindset of like, look, I'm going to watch and see what the industry is going to do. I'm going to watch and see what other people's are doing. Like I understand that there's some value here, but like I'm not going to be on the early adopter side. And having come from a software background, in the healthcare staffing industry where we were building software that was quite new and a different approach to the business where it took years, I think, for people to get from the curve of like the new thing we were doing to that becoming industry standard, where we've actually gotten there much faster this time around. And I think that is because you've got the consumer layer of like ChatGPT and Anthropic and Gemini, where people are actually seeing this make an impact on their personal life. So people are becoming much more willing, much faster, I think, than previous periods in history to adopt new technology.
You talked a minute ago, and I've seen this as well, people building out on their own because like you just said, there's a lot of just like consumer facing tools. You can start building your own GPTs. Like there's just so much available to the end user, and a lot of innovative, like forward thinking, maybe tech savvy owners are just out there creating, which I think is great. Address the HIPAA concern there though, because that is a pitfall that not enough people are thinking about in healthcare, let alone home care.
Yeah, it's quite complex, from a HIPAA perspective to know what you're doing. And, you should not just be dumping, PHI and PAI into ChatGPT. People are doing that, unfortunately, but that is not the path you should be going. I think like complexity wise from a security standpoint, it still takes qualified, security engineers to make sure that you're handling things correctly. It also means that if you're going to be working with, say, the foundational models like, OpenAI and Anthropic and Gemini, which every AI company like Phoebe is working with them and on top of their stack in some level. You have to have the kind of enterprise relationships. You have to have BAA signed, and then you have to make sure you're continuously monitoring everything from a security infrastructure. And you just can't really get that as an indie builder. And you can, but it becomes quite expensive because you generally, just like a couple examples, you sign a BAA with kind of a phone service provider like Twilio or OpenAI. You're committing to minimum spends that are frankly like unreasonable minimum spends for individual companies. But when you're building software as a whole, and you've got kind of many customers and are able to distribute the cost of things like that across many, it becomes very cost effective. So at this point, the kind of security layer for the average consumer is it's possible. Don't get me wrong. There are lots of people doing it the right way, but it's difficult and expensive.
And I bring that up not as like a scare tactic, but it's
Right.
just like there's a lot of operators out there doing that. And I just like fear for that and what that can turn into. And maybe there's not a lot of like checks and balances in place for that today, but doesn't mean that there won't be very soon. And so I just bring that up as like a something that everybody needs to be aware of and be mindful because yeah, we're all just like dumping stuff in there and where it goes and how that works is, even you and I are like experts when it comes to like that compliance, but it's just something that people need to be aware of at this early stage. I like what you said a minute ago about we're in this like mid-ground stage, especially in home care where AI is a teammate and it fits inside of existing workflows. It's not a replacement. And I think that is a common misconception partly because companies are coming on the scene and saying, hey, we can just automate everything end to end. But I don't think that's where we should be today. We are very much like in this mid ground where we're transitioning. And so today, AI is best suited to like plug in to pieces of workflows. Um, why is that? Like, I guess there is the ability for, like, voice just to take over and do it all, but I guess, like, from your perspective and what you're seeing and hearing, like, why do we have to go through this transition period, and why is it best suited to fit into existing workflows?
Yeah, great questions, and something we spend a lot of time, yeah, talking to kind of prospects and customers about, just because they have often before they meet us, tried to been sold on, what we consider a false promise of like, hey, just let us plug this in over the next 60 days and kind of automate out the scheduler. And we don't really see it that way for several reasons. From an industry perspective, which is maybe the most interesting, there's data that lives inside of your systems, your EHRs, your scheduling systems, and then there's also the critical layer that lives in the heads of the schedulers and the coordinators and the owners and the people that are actually doing this work and chatting with the clients and caregivers every day. So coming in and saying, hey, we're just going to plug in and leverage the data from your system to know exactly what to do. We think a pretty big mistake, just because there's so much critical, we'll say, tribal knowledge about the business and the operations and the community of people on the caregiver and client side that the AI is going to be communicating with that the systems just don't know. So having that, say, AI as a co-pilot perspective enables AI to use the data at its disposal to make some, say, initial recommendations on how to approach a situation. Revert back to the kind of human who's been doing this work, for years, to say like, how on or off am I on this list of recommendations, and then give them the ability to kind of coach the next step forward, both from like a now perspective, like who am I going to have the AI or Phoebe call right now, but then also like what can Phoebe learn for next time, so that the tribal knowledge that's in one of 7 coordinators' heads, they don't have to go to that person next time. They can then kind of figure out what did this person do last time by asking the AI. Uh,
Really good points.
yeah.
This might be an impossible question, but my mind, you know me, I love to like quantify, like how much lives in the system versus how much lives in the scheduler's heads. And that varies. Like every operation, every scheduler is different. But if you're talking to schedulers, like if you had to put numbers to it, how much of the scheduling function is actually documented in a software versus how much is actually just like ambiguously living in the heads of the people.
Yeah, that's a great question, and not something I've spent a lot of time trying to quantify, but I'll make my best like just qu- qualitative guess at this based on kind of all of our customer use and all of the conversations Phoebe has. Is usually the initial recommendations that we'll say are suggested by default, say by the AHR, like at best, they're like 50% of the way there because you have number one, just stuff that's not getting documented. Even these, schedulers and coordinators, like even if they're a 10 out of 10 at documenting kind of in the preferences and profiles, they just don't have time. You're having so many conversations, like you're calling a caregiver and caregivers saying like, no, I can't take the shift, but also I'm going to be out of town next week. And it's like nice that the scheduler would go write that down. But the reality is like they have 35 more calls to make. So number one, like even if you've got just great, folks doing the documentation, a lot of that just doesn't ever make it to the system. But then even in the cases where it does make it to the system, it's very limited in the way that, say, the old way of like kind of preference matching and kind of storing a caregiver's availability and preferences or a client's preferences. The old way is just like has a dog, likes dogs, versus the kind of new AI forward way, which is what currently lives in the heads of the schedulers, which is like, okay, they're okay with dogs, but they're not going to go into a house with a dog that's over 50 pounds or under 50 pounds, depending upon kind of the preference of the caregiver. And there's just really not a place for like existing like one-to-one matching technology in these like existing or current scheduling systems to do anything with that data. So that's that layer that lives on top of it. And the scheduler's head or the coordinator's head is you have that base level information, and then you have like what's actually important. And maybe one more quick example, like, caregiver says they're willing to go in a 5 mile radius of their home address, but they actually won't go to this neighborhood or that neighborhood. And there's not really a easy way to match that the way that these like systems deal with matching. So that information, maybe it lives in a free text field, maybe it lives in a note, but it largely lives in kind of the heads of the team, where we take that AI as a teammate, not a replacement approach, because, number one, we don't have that information at our disposal, but number two, like we can get that information at our disposal by working as a co-pilot alongside the scheduler and absorbing that information over time, not just from kind of the input the scheduler is giving, but also from all the conversations that Phoebe goes out and is having with caregivers day in and day out.
Yeah, this is so good, Dave. I agree that I wanna, like, kinda walk back my thinking on that a little bit is the ratio, like, what lives in the software versus what lives in the head is not reflective of the quality of the scheduler, because I would actually
100%.
say if, executives look at their schedulers, the best schedulers likely have way too much in their heads, which makes them a good scheduler.
Right.
And you said a minute ago, even if they're 10 out of 10 in documentation, the volume is just so great, they can't get 100% of the conversations of the documentation in the software. There's just no possible way, and so I actually think, like, the best schedulers likely have 70, 80% in their head and a good amount in the software as well, but, like, there's just so many moving parts and so many conversations and so many nuances, like the likes dogs, the radius from their house, like, those are just things that they know about their people, and the best schedulers just know everything about all of the people in their purview, which makes them great. And so, roundabout, I think this is why AI has to be this mid layer right now, is because just operationally, we are still trying to figure out what lives in the software, what lives in the heads, where does everything live best, and how does it all coexist, and then how does AI like split the gap in all of these different senses.
Right. No, 100%. And it's so interesting to think about maybe something we talked about earlier of like the pace of adoption and people who are maybe still sitting on the sidelines. And, one benefit, even if you're just dipping your toe into the water, is just like a scheduler on day one when they start, they have very little baseline knowledge of, what goes into the clients and the caregivers. And it takes them, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to really get to the point where they can just rattle off like, hey, who should I call in this situation? The AI is the same way. The AI is learning based off of the interactions that's happening, with the staff, with the schedulers, with the caregivers, eventually with the clients. So that like early adoption for say AI as your co-pilot, AI as your teammate, it's not just helping your schedulers be more effective, but it's also taking that tribal knowledge layer that it takes months, to build up inside of a scheduler's head. And then, they go on and get a different job and all that knowledge like walks out the door. You start using this technology now. And if you set it up the kind of approach that the approach that we're taking with it, it's, the AI is from day one able to take that tribal knowledge layer and build it up over time and actually encode it into the software, which is really only possible for the first time, like right now.
Exactly, because everything happens through the phone calls and texts. and put AI in that communication, already the time savings, the cost savings, the efficiency is the AI is just absorbing every single communication that's happening, whereas that was not in existence several years ago. And that is just like the biggest unlock is just like AI is now a part of that communication. And there's way less manual documentation because it can just absorb all that information, aggregate it, place it, process it, systematize it. Like it's just so capable of helping with all of that documentation. Um,
Definitely.
let's let's talk more about these specific workflows of a scheduler. Like I want to just kind of like unpack each of them a little bit more so you can paint in like what's literally possible. Let's start with just the outreach. And you guys have some incredible case studies already on your website. I was watching and reading and just like refreshing on those. There's all these phone calls. Well, yeah, where should we start with the outreach specifically? Is like there's a missed shift or like a call out happening and there's like this window of time when you need to reach out to so many caregivers. What exactly is happening? Say a call out is like made known. What is the workflow for Phoebe and the office and the scheduler together?
Yeah, great question. So, the current way, industry status quo, which is, everyone's doing the best they can, is you get a call out. Let's say you've got 90 minutes to 2 hours to fill the shift because that's all the notice you received. It's, on average with, what we're getting reported back from some of our customers, which we have some of this, in one of our recent case studies. It's going to take a scheduler, a coordinator, end to end 7 minutes to make, a call to one caregiver. And that's not just physically on the phone, but like figuring out who to dial, dialing them, leaving voicemails, making notes in the kind of scheduling system as a result of the call. And it's like 7 minutes, kind of on average from one customer we've done quite a lot of data tracking with. And then on average, you're calling maybe 15, 20 caregivers in order to get a shift covered. So if you're talking, 7 minutes a call, 20 different caregivers, I've now put myself in a fast math situation, but
Yeah.
we'll call that, what,
An hour
140
and a half to 2
140
hours.
minutes of
Yeah.
calling. Yeah. So, with Phoebe, we, you know, number one, like, scheduler asks Phoebe for help. Say, "Hey, Phoebe, I want you to help me with the shift." And Phoebe goes into that moment and goes into the EHR scheduling system, looks at the care plan, looks at the ADLs, IADLs, preferences, past visit information, past notes, information about who's seen the, client before. And we extract, a knowledge base of like everything that the scheduler might actually be going in and reading, and it takes them 5-10 minutes to figure out like, okay, who am I going to call? The AI goes in and extracts that information just in a few seconds and builds up a nice knowledge base of everything it needs to know about the shift. And then based on the data in the system, we'll make that list of recommended caregivers, where your typical scheduler workflow might be like, okay, this person looks good, I'm going to spend 7 minutes calling them. And then they hang up the phone, no result. Okay, now I'm going to spend a few minutes finding my next person. And really upfront, then Phoebe provides you with that like baseline set of recommendations, gives the scheduler the ability to spend, I would say on average, a minute, 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, kind of finessing the list based on all sorts of ways the scheduler can search, sort, and filter through the information or the recommendations Phoebe's providing. And then rather than making those like 140 minutes of phone calls, Phoebe just has that, 3 to 5 minute conversation with every caregiver at the same time. So that scheduler then can kind of move on to the next fire for the next 5 minutes while they wait for Phoebe to do its thing. Phoebe will let them know, like, hey, Miriam, I found someone to take the shift. Click here, check out the results. And when you open that up, you can play back a recording of the call. We generate a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the conversation so the scheduler can see exactly what happened very quickly. And then we also provide the full transcript in case there's anything that kind of needs to go back through. So with that, the scheduler then is brought back into the loop. So scheduler like directs Phoebe to do the outreach, kind of make sure that Phoebe's not reaching out to caregivers that it's going to waste their time or it's kind of a bad batch to reach out to. Phoebe does the work, brings the results back, and then ultimately brings the decision back to the scheduler. Again, just because you might have 2, 3, 4 people who in 2 or 3 minutes ultimately end up saying, hey, I want the shift. We bring that decision back to the scheduler. The scheduler's the one who's going to know like who's the right person for that client. And when they approve them, Phoebe then does all the follow-up work, where very often like it's a scheduler's dream to they get a shift filled, they let all the 14 other people they left voicemails know that the shift is now closed. But the reality is they, even if they mean to or intend to, or it's part of the policy, it just doesn't happen most of the time. So with Phoebe, it's going to automatically do that once someone's been assigned to the shift. That way, you're closing the loop with the caregivers, not having to field callbacks from folks about something that's no longer open. But then it's also going to really pull for more information from that caregiver about like, well, when else should we call you? Like this shift is open, but what else do you want? So that way we can start to layer that information in over time to the recommendations. Where day one we're really just basing the recommendations on what we know from the EHR or from the scheduling system, and day 30, day 60, day 90, it's getting smarter and smarter and smarter because we're able to layer in all the information that we're collecting from those conversations, as well as the directives from the scheduler to improve the recommendations over time. So, like, short recap of that is right now it's an hour, 2 hours, 30 minutes, kind of depending on the situation, to do all the outreach. And Phoebe handles that in just a few minutes. And globally across our customers, we're targeting a kind of 5 minute fill rate. We see it a little bit higher than that now, but well under 10 minutes on average to get a shift filled from basically time they call out to full replacement.
Insane, insane. And it's live, it's real. It's like this is not hypothetical. Like this is active live today. Agencies are using this. If you're not using it, you're already behind the eight ball. Lots of questions. My first question is you talk about like the old way of matching like this to that with client caregiver based off their profiles and preferences. Is there a layer of transparency for the scheduler to see into that initial like discovery phase where you just initiate Phoebe, she goes in and she's just like reading and absorbing and like putting together her assessment of matches? Is there transparency into that so that a scheduler, again, with all of their base like head knowledge, can they go in and like manipulate that stage?
They can, yeah. So we provide like clear insights into like exactly what the match criteria are. Um, you know, because we're basing it off of initially the information that's coming directly from the scheduling platform and the caregiver profiles and client profiles, it's fairly straightforward, but it's interesting how nuanced it becomes over time because, imagine you're a scheduler and if you had all the time in the world, you would just build these like novels of information on a caregiver and a novel of information on the client. And you'd be able to like, every time you go to schedule a client, you just like read through these, 2, 3, 4 page bios of the caregivers to figure out like exactly who I should send, but that's not practical as a person. But Phoebe, then over time we're building up those like long form, like very kind of detailed, qualitative overviews of like what people want, when they want it, how they want it, and the AI can read through that very quickly. I'm sure most people listening have experienced this at this point, where you can feed a document or what have you to ChatGPT, and something that would take you an hour to read or an hour to listen to, you can get a summary back in 30 seconds. And imagine layering that on top of all of your caregiver profiles at the same time when you're trying to find the match with the client. So we're transparent in the reasons we're making the recommendations. And then we also give the caregiver the ability to say like, okay, well, I see that, this person was recommended because they live within 3 miles of the shift and it's a faster drive for them than somebody who is 2.5 miles away, but on the other side of the bridge. But then the scheduler knows like, well, despite the fact that this is faster for this person, I know for sure this person's not going to go work on this neighborhood or this street. So that's where that like, human layer comes into the matches as well.
Exactly, and this is just validating what we were saying earlier, is like there's still so much in the head, and so you can't just rely on the EMR data. It has to be a combination with the scheduler in the loop, involved in like manipulating all of that criteria and things. Um, Talk about like QA, like quality assurance, that this goes smoothly every single time, because that is the concern of like, oh, one off, it does well, but like at scale, every single call, every single text, every single match, like what I guess checks and balances do you all have internally as a software company to make sure that this is effective and accurate, like time and time again?
Yeah, great question and a super important one. So with, quality on these calls, like a few things we're doing. Number one, like we set kind of the AI up to be like very task oriented. Like this is the set of information, this is like the set of rules and guardrails you're kind of bound to live by and act by. And if anything comes up outside of the number one, like your knowledge of the client or caregiver situation, or number two, outside of the job you were given to do, we don't try to make it up. I think a lot of AI out there, like the guardrails is quite they're quite difficult to execute. So if you're not giving very specific kind of like lanes for the AI to stay in, like you could end up having, the conversation go off in a totally different direction for 30 minutes and make some promises that you never should have made. But with very tight guardrails, the way we control QA is like, number one, we don't try to box people into conversations. So if something comes up, for example, caregiver asks a question, Phoebe doesn't know the answer, it's not going to try to kind of skip over it and persuade the person to take the shift anyways. It's going to just bring the human back into the loop and say like, look, I don't have an answer for that. I'm going to bring, so-and-so in from the agency. I'll get them on the phone and you can continue the conversation, with them. So number one, like quality assurance mechanism is like, don't make things up, have tight guardrails, and then bring the human into the phone and don't try to trap the person into an AI call that's going to lead nowhere. I think that's, we talked a bit earlier about misconceptions. A lot of people come in and think like, oh, robocall, like they're used to the typical like robocall where like you're just mashing zero over and over and over again to try to be human. Like I do that even right now.
Yeah.
So it's very different than that because like it's very, task oriented and knowledge backed to say like, this is what I know. This is the task I'm trying to do. If it falls outside of the bound of that, I'm just going to revert back to the human layer that like still remains a critical component to be in the loop. And then, other QA mechanisms we actually provide for every single text, every single call. It's all visible in Phoebe at all times. So there's never operating in the dark. Even every voicemail is like transcribed, recorded, available to be listened back to by the company. And in those cases, it's kind of interesting way to think about it, but like thumbs up, thumbs down rating for every single piece of communication that ever happens. So if there's ever something where Phoebe's, done something that's not within the bounds of the agency's policies or something that, even they would like to do a little bit differently from a culture or approach perspective, you just like say Phoebe, like thumbs down, it'll pop open a box. You can explain why you didn't like that. And then Phoebe will learn. So that's like, we very heavily encourage folks to use that, especially early on. We also were meeting with customers, reviewing their data, reviewing the results, reviewing the outcomes, taking their direct feedback and kind of coaching or guiding or stylizing the way Phoebe's behaving. But ultimately, the transparency and then the guardrails are the keys.
Yeah, and we've all been on like the flip side of like guardrails gone wrong or like the lack thereof, and I think that's where people also run into that issue of like building on their own. They can't quite like perfect the guardrails, but that's what you all like focus on is like the guardrails, and I think that's smart. Of like if it hits a wall or if it hits a point where it can't go further, it doesn't have the knowledge necessary. It's like just default back to the scheduler, like default back to the human. Like don't guess because AI will. It will literally just like it has a mind of its own and we've all
Right.
experienced that, but it's telling it not to have a mind of its own when it gets to a certain point, like default to the human, and that alone is just like so important. Talk about like data storage and memory. So you were saying a minute ago, the beauty of the AI too is it's absorbing and learning like the communication patterns of say the caregivers, like their response rate, their response time, the time of day that they're responding. Like there's all this memory that it's accumulating. How is the data stored? And kind of explain how it is learning about the schedulers, but also the preferences and communication styles of say the caregivers as well.
Yeah, this is like such a fun technical challenge for our team to be working on. We have like some fantastic founding engineers and, early team members that like live and breathe this stuff every day. So it's very fun to talk about. Phoebe, imagine kind of the human workflow, where like the average scheduler still is doing this. They maybe have a notebook or an Excel file or Google Sheets or kind of whatever their workflow is. And as they're like thinking about important things they want to remember about the caregiver, they're writing it down and kind of keeping, we'll say, a diary of each caregiver situation. You could think of that as like the base layer for this, where Phoebe is with every call, every text, it's basically looking for, okay, here are these like 50 kind of key preferences that are important to matching caregivers with clients and making great relationships. So it's constantly like anytime any of those things are coming up, we're say extracting that and putting it into, we'll call it like the core memory of the caregiver. And you can almost think of it like it is not technically stored this way, but if you just had like a piece of paper with everything that was important always written down, and every time something changed about what somebody liked or wanted, you kind of scratch out the old thing and update it with the new thing. And then if you break that down a little bit further, you've got the concept of like long-term memory. Like I had an incident with a dog that was very large. I'm no longer comfortable going into a house with dogs over 60 pounds, but I'll happily go into a house with a small dog. You have that kind of long term, like qualitative, very detailed, but like that's something that could be committed to that caregiver memory for forever. And then you have more of the short term things like availability preferences, like I am going to be on vacation next week. That's kind of committed to the short term memory. So if you think about it, like that piece of paper reference is kind of at the top of the page. It's the most important thing that needs to be seen based on the existing or current recommendations or current time frame. And then you also have the more behavioral layer, which frankly today is very rarely looked at outside of kind of the approach we're taking, here at Phoebe is uh, it's Tuesday. Over the last 30 days, how many times did Dave pick up the phone on Tuesday? And does he actually text back faster than he calls? Does he sometimes text back faster if it's Saturday versus Wednesday? Being able to actually take those response times and not just say, like, what do people want and what do people like and what do people have experience and skills with, but like, what do people actually do? And that's the very interesting layer that then gets brought into the kind of memory layer of the caregivers of like, I know that Dave is qualified. I know that on paper he says he wants to work on Tuesday. I know that 0 times in the last 90 days has he picked up a same day shift. So I'm probably not going to put Dave at the top of the list.
And this is next level. Like, this is where I, like, almost get chills, like, we're so nerdy over this type of stuff, like, this is so good. Like, finding out the patterns, the communication patterns of, like, caregivers at scale, because it's true, they're working long hours, their response times are slow, some people are phone-based, some people are text-based, like, there's just so many nuances to the communication layer, and if AI can understand that and then also do the outreach in the way that's most conducive to the individual, like, it's our game to lose. Like, that is how this industry evolves from what it is to where it's going.
100%. And admittedly, it's a very complex thing to solve. So I don't want to like paint the false promise of you come in on day one and day two, Phoebe just knows everything about your caregivers and it's like acting totally different than it did on day one. It takes time to build up these memories. And even for us to like incorporate the memory layer in for new clients, it's not an instant process, but it's something that, starts working on day one. And then more and more you work with it, the better and better it becomes. And it's a very, interesting challenge. It's also changing over time. I mean, just as a reference point for folks, if there's any, say, like ChatGPT or, Anthropic or Claude users out here, you can actually go into your settings and look at what memory the AI has on you. So it might give a good like reference point to kind of think about how we approach this.
Yeah, and I personally like that word, like, learning. Like, the way a human learns, the AI has to learn. It has to spend time with your people for 60, 90, 180 days to be able to get, like, an accurate reading of what that person is like. Like you just said, it's not overnight because it quite literally has to learn patterns and behaviors over a set period of time. But
Right.
I think that's the cool thing with it, and that's the thing with home care, like, you and I both, home care is home care, but every agency operates a little bit differently. Every set of caregivers, every set of clients, every office team, there's just little cultural nuances, regional based nuances to the different people involved. And so AI has to just like quite literally spend time with your people to be best suited to help your people in your processes.
100%. And maybe like one more thing to tag on that is, you know, there are things that like schedulers today, wish they had more time to spend with their caregivers so they could learn more and, form better relationships, both on the caregiver and client side, also thinking about growth. And there are so many things that schedulers have to do that kind of prevent them from doing that. But then there are also tons of things schedulers, and coordinators, they just don't do because it's very expensive for a human to sit there and call like a list of 200 people who used to work for you last year, but kind of fell off the radar and fell off the grid. It's very expensive to call them because most of them don't answer. And it's very expensive to try to figure out like, what are their updated preferences? Are they looking for work? And you start to thinking about like, how do you bring kind of AI into this early on to learn more about your caregivers and learn more about your clients? And it's not just the learning there, but it's also the fact that, we can have an AI or have Phoebe go out and reach out to people that you would never call because historically it was just too expensive to call them. And it's much more cost effective to do this at scale. So it's not just about like the Phoebe doing the things that you do today, but it's also about doing the things that you would do if it was less expensive or if you had more people to do the work.
Great point. I'm glad you brought that up because the concern might be Phoebe will learn what your people already know, which is here's like a team that always responds, that always picks up shifts, and that doesn't like help the capacity issue. But like you're saying, it will actually do reach out to the B, C, D, E, F team, that's like non existent or non responsive or hasn't been active for months and months. It can go out and that's the cool thing is, like, you can build workflows for this specifically. It's like, "Hey, we haven't talked to this person in 6 months." They shouldn't be looped into, like, present day communication. They need, like, a certain set of communication tailored to them and their circumstances, and so it can be molded to all these different groups of people and built specifically for, like, their circumstances.
100%.
This is so good. I want you to address just quickly, we spent a lot of time about outreach. Like that has a lot of different forms that it can take in a lot of different ways. But the other two that I just want you to like touch on briefly is like shift confirmation, like quite literally the AI just helping with shift confirmation. And then also missed clock ins and clock outs. When we talk about LTC and government payers, like the importance of shift confirmation and missed clock in and clock outs, that alone is tedious and nobody wants to do that manually. And we shouldn't be doing that manually anymore with AI. Just explain just high level kind of those two workflows and the unlocks.
Yeah. So with shift confirmations, it's interesting because we're like 50-50 with our customers where like before Phoebe, they just didn't do it. They maybe would do it for holidays, weekends, different situations, but like the consistent day-to-day shift confirmations is not necessarily a pattern of every agency. But then we have agencies that are like literally have a person that does this all day, every day before Phoebe. And especially situations where you have that, say, heavy 24/7 caregiver to caregiver handoff, where it's just imperative that somebody shows up. So with the shift confirmations, Phoebe's going in and checking your schedule every day, automatically sending a text message to everybody about their shift or shifts for the following day. Caregivers can engage with that, which makes it quite different from like a reminder that would come from like an EHR. That's just a one-way thing that most caregivers just block the number. It's quite different when it comes from Phoebe because Phoebe can say like, hey, just want to check in, Dave, are you going to be at your shift in this neighborhood at this time tomorrow? And caregiver can say like, yeah, but can you like remind me what the care plan is again? I haven't seen this client in a while. And like Phoebe can actually engage with that. And then on the agency side, like for the owner operator, side of the conversation, the scheduler Phoebe naturally collects the response to that. So it's not like this robotic, like you have to press 1 if you're going to be there or 2 if you're not going to be there. You just respond just like you would if you were kind of chatting with your scheduler, and Phoebe will process that, ask questions if it has questions about the response you gave. And then you have a nice clean dashboard that'll, from a practical level, a scheduler might log into their Phoebe dashboard at noon every day after Phoebe's done a couple of outreaches to anyone who, number one, hopefully they respond on the first one, but if not, Phoebe follows up until it gets a response. So you might log in at noon every day and see, okay, I've got 150 caregivers on my schedule for tomorrow. These 115 have confirmed their shifts, and it's just a nice, clean, like confirmation status all the way down the line. And these, we'll call it 32, were skipped because Phoebe's going to learn and not contact caregivers who see the same clients every day. If people have a consistent pattern of showing up, they have the same recurring schedule, those people, aren't going to get that kind of text every day because it's something that they're just doing day in and day out. You can override that and have Phoebe do it for everybody, but most of the time the kind of skip list is utilized. And then you might have
I'm
these.
glad you're addressing that because that was going to be my question. Can it be toggled on and off for different individuals? Because yes, there's like the very consistent people that have been with
Yeah,
you for years and it doesn't make sense. So it sounds like it can be customized by
it,
individual.
it can be customized by individual, also by schedule. We have clients who say we only want to do it for new employees, Monday to Friday, but on the weekends we want to do it for everybody. We don't want to do it for even new employees except for on holidays. So there's all sorts of configurations you can do, and that's like you can real time just kind of say like, this week I'm going to change my schedule, or this week I'm going to change my cadence. And the end result of that is very high compliance. We see 90, 95, oftentimes honestly 100% compliance with the process as long as it's implemented well with the caregivers, and we work with you to make sure like the implementation plan is solid. And then the flip side of that is it uncovers your issues. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 caregivers that respond back and say, look, I didn't know I was supposed to work, I can't be there, or look, my shift, you told me it was at 10. Now this is saying it's at 8. So any of those issues that typically you wouldn't learn about until the person doesn't clock in or doesn't clock out, Phoebe's surfacing those early. And then that rolls right into that scheduling assistant to help get a shift covered if you need it. I can roll right into like quick explanation on the clock in, clock out if you want, but
Yeah, do it. Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
yeah, so that one's also interesting. Like just like the shift confirmations, like Phoebe can basically do the work. And you obviously have the edge cases of like it, let's say it used to take somebody half a day to sit there and like do the shift confirmations all day. Like Phoebe is eliminating, we'll say 3.8 hours of that work, like right out of the gate. It's the same thing with the missed clock ins and clock outs where typically agencies have, somebody monitoring their inbox for notifications about somebody who didn't clock in, didn't clock out. With Phoebe, by the time that notification hits, because we're not waiting on the information to come back from the EHR, Phoebe's going out and proactively like using the EHR to check to make sure people are clocked in, checking the schedule, checking the system. And by the time you would get that notification, Phoebe's already texted the caregiver. If they don't pick up, Phoebe's going to call the caregiver, and it can troubleshoot with them. And we do the same thing on the clock out, except for we call first because oftentimes, right, you miss your clock out, caregiver's already driving. We're not going to text them because they're probably not going to text back. So Phoebe will call on kind of the back end of the shift. And then depending upon your payer mix, whether you're like all private pay or you're doing, waivers and Medicaid or what your state EVV rules are, Phoebe can go into your system and actually update the clock out record or clock in record. So for example, caregiver, picks up the phone, says like, oh man, I'm already in the car. I left 5 minutes ago. And if it's a EVV situation where the geofence is critical, Phoebe will direct them like, please turn around and go clock out. Or if it's a situation where it's private pay, you don't need the EVV record, Phoebe can say like, no problem. I've documented the fact that we're talking right now. I have this, on record, and I will go into the system and just update your clock out record for you. So that spins off into all sorts of like interesting nuance use cases where people are now texting Phoebe like, hey, clock me in because I'm like, I don't have signal right now. All I have is the ability to send them SMS. I don't have any, any Wi-Fi to send, especially in like rural situations. So we're getting into interesting use cases where you can literally just like, hey, Phoebe, clock me in. And Phoebe will just do it.
This is so cool. This is so, so cool. We talk about home care being reactive. Like there's just a layer of home care that is and maybe always will be reactive. But this is how we get on the offensive. This is how we become proactive, is through this type of technology that is real time, that is keeping everybody up to date, on their toes, forward thinking, like proactive rather than reactive. Like so much is reactive because there's just like volume and nuance and phone calls and documentation. And we just like can't keep up. Like the margins are too thin. Like we just can't keep up. But this really, I think, is how we're going to like get on the offensive and how we break into just like a new playing field in home care. Quite literally, I think this is just like the start of an industry that will look very differently in just a couple of years. In our last couple of minutes, I want to ask you like three like pretty pointed questions. One is, I think a lot of owners are excited. They're on board. They're interested. They've got the buzz, like they want in. The hang up is the office team. And the nature of this office team is some of these administrators have been in healthcare for a long time. They might be a little tech averse and might be fearful of, rewriting their workflows. How are you easing the burden and mitigating like the change management with the office team?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, if you're thinking about like the like individual, execution layer for a scheduler, coordinator, et cetera, like those folks, like there's obviously some general, like, what is this going to do to my job perspective? But once people start using it, they really realize like, we're not here to replace you. We're here to help your agency, like double your hours. And we don't want you to have to manage another employee. We want you to not have to make all the calls you don't want to have to make. So like, if we think about like what AI is replacing, it's not replacing people. It's replacing constraints and removing constraints and giving you speed and giving you accuracy, giving you consistency, giving you documentation. So like when we're talking about like the hesitancy from office staff, whether it's from a individual contributor level or whether you're talking about your leaderships, like, we're not coming in and saying like AI is going to replace your leadership or your culture. It's going to give you more time to focus on things like that. And then, from a actual like owner listening to this, like thinking about making a decision, or thinking about exploring this, like we maybe take a different approach than a lot of software companies. This is not our first run at building software, and we are very interested in working with people who are getting value out of what we build, and that, like, frankly, want to talk and hang out with us on calls like this. And if you're not happy, if you're not getting results, like, there's no financial penalty to cancel. There's no long-term contract. We want you to be here because you want to be here, and we just let the software, think for itself. So if you're sitting on the sidelines thinking like, I can't make a commitment, like, if it's a bad decision, I'm going to be stuck in this contract. Like most software companies, that's probably true. But we really take the approach of like, we want the software to speak for itself. If you're not happy, like, uh, you're free to go. No financial penalty, and we'll actually let you take all the data with you.
Yeah, I wanna just add my 2 cents to that is, like, I talk to a lot of owners. I feel like they wanna, like, protect their office team, and this they almost put up this barrier themselves, I think, actually, because I agree when I talk to schedulers and administrators and you explain what this does to their job, it actually removes all of the manual burden that they're tired of doing. And so I think I was curious what you were gonna say to that because I've experienced that firsthand where I think the owner subconsciously is, like, protecting their team and is like, "This is gonna be a huge overhaul, and I don't think my team's gonna want it, and I think this is gonna scare away my schedulers." I'm like, "No, this is like," and then you put it in front of them and they're like, "I can't imagine my life without this." Like, they start using it and they're like, "There is no going back." Like, I've literally experienced that firsthand, and it's like my 2 cents to the owners listening to this is like, don't put that barrier up around your team, like, expose them to this, get them excited about this, like, this is the future of their workflows, expose it to them now early, and let their minds, like, run on the possibilities of this, and then you build something with them, and it's, like, revolutionizing of your operations, like, quite literally, and so, I agree, like, too many owners are yeah, like that first line of defense, and I get that they wanna protect their team, but don't do that.
100%. And just like quick comment, like, we talk to owners all the time and they're like, I don't know how my scheduling team's going to feel. Like, yeah, I got to position this to them. And I'm always like, just, can I talk to them? Let's have another call. Like, let me show them this. And, there's been very few situations where the next step after that scheduler call has not resulted in them using Phoebe, just because they see it, they feel it. They're like, man, this is great. And, the positioning we're taking too is like Phoebe is very easy to learn. Like it sounds complex. AI is doing all these things for you, but there's not a lot of things to click. It's like pretty straightforward. And admittedly, like what I'll call it like self-driving software where you're not actually going through and clicking buttons and creating things and approving things. Like you're just kind of chatting with Phoebe and then Phoebe's using the software for you. And admittedly, we're like in the middle ground of that too, where like before we get to the kind of full self-driving kind of interface where you're able to just chat with Phoebe like a teammate. Like we've got to do some traditional software things. But at the end of the day, like our goal is like we come in, we use your tools, we use your software, we use your infrastructure. Phoebe learns your procedures, learns your policies, learns your culture, and we just work the way you work. And you don't have to come in and have this heavy burden that typically with software is like I've got to like rip out this tool and replace it with that tool. Like we're not trying to rip and replace anything. We're just here to like help you use your tools better and make you click less things every day.
Add to, yeah, add to and supplement everything that's already happening, and we didn't even talk about, like, ratio, like a scheduler to roster ratio, but I think when we just talk about scale, it's just making every scheduler more efficient. You said it like, 1 to 2x. We're talking like maybe in like 3 to 4x, like just the volume that one scheduler is able to handle with this level of technology. And that's what we're all about is like efficiency. In home care in every industry, it's just how do we maximize and make every single person more efficient to cut costs, and that's exactly what this can do.
100%. And you're not just like the scheduler's not just say able to now handle 3,000 hours of care instead of 1,500 on a weekly basis, but they're also doing it in a mechanism where like the 90% of the phone calls they used to hate, they don't have to do those anymore. So it's quite nice for the scheduling perspective.
Job satisfaction is going up and burnout is going down, and turnover is the silent killer in this industry at the caregiver level and even in the office level. And so if you're reducing that burnout, reducing that turnover, and reducing those turnover costs, like it's a win for everybody. Dave, I'm so excited for you guys. Like I'm just this talking about this, it just lights me up. I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited for the agencies that are adopting this. I'm excited for like where this industry is going. Again, I just get like chills thinking about this because we're at like the brink of the beginning of what this is about to do to this industry. And I don't say that lightly. Like I genuinely mean that when you start experiencing this technology firsthand and seeing what it can do, your customers have said it, the agencies I work with have said it. It's just like there's no turning back. Like once you're exposed to this, there is no going back. And so, thank you for joining me in the lab. I guess my last question is just best place for people to learn more about Phoebe. What's the website, your email, or how do you want people to contact you? I know you're booked out, and I know there like maybe is a wait list almost at this point, but how can people reach out to you and get in contact?
Yeah, so you can find us online. It's a bit of an odd domain, but phoebe.work. So it's easy to remember, but like phoebe.work is where you can find us online. You can email me also dave@phoebe.work. So pretty straightforward there. We have a nice, like easy process for you to like get on our calendar on the website. There's case studies, there's videos, there's a ton of information for you, but uh, directly reach out, dave@phoebe.work, or you can head to the website, fill out the form. And, if you do that, we kind of, based on the information you're putting in the form, like it's a pretty clear, can we get you implemented right now? Or would you be on kind of more of a wait list for as we expand to different EHRs and scheduling systems? But reach out. We are all humans, despite the fact that we're an AI company. If you're reaching out to our company, there's zero AI layer between me and you. So if you're getting an email back from me or from Justin or from anybody on our team, it is us doing that. So
Good disclaimer there. Dave is not an AI. I'm talking to a real human across from me. So,
yeah, the
Dave, this has been
video
awesome.
the video AI stuff is getting pretty crazy. I don't know how many years away we are, but like at some point I might not be here talking to you. So
Yeah, we're not there yet. I still have a job today. People say that. What about AI on your podcast? I'm like, oh, I mean, we're a ways out, but we're real humans having this conversation, which is what makes it so good. So, Dave, thanks again for joining me. This is super exciting. Onward and upward for both of us. We'll stay in touch. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll go ahead and wrap here.
yep. Thanks, Miriam.